From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis for this, the first broadcast of our show in 2018. So let me be probably the last to wish you a happy, but more importantly, a sane new year. A happy and sane 2018. You know, I've been impressed by the number of commentators who've been arguing the case for skipping these obligatory, let's look forward to the new year and see what's going to happen kind of shows, because if the Trump era has taught us anything at all, it's that nothing can be predicted further out than maybe about an hour or so until he tweets the next thing. So today, we've summoned two really smart people with long experience covering news and politics in the region for a, let's call it a, where are we right now anyway, and what does it all mean discussion to kick off 2018. I think that's probably the better way to go. And those persons are Hal Dardick. Hal, of course, been on the show many times before, City Hall reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Glad to have you back, Hal.
Glad to be here.
And for this important assignment, most important assignment you've had yet in 2018.
It probably is, because I've been kind of resting on my laurels for the past few days.
You've actually had time off.
Yes.
Yes, congratulations to you and the Tribune for being so generous with your time. Madeleine Doubek is joining us. Madeleine is with the BGA. Let's see, you are the Director of Civic Engagement at the BGA, the Better
correct.
Government Association. Glad to have you back.
Thanks,
and
Ken.
long time, of course, with the Daily Herald as Executive Editor. So I'm glad to have you here and back here on the show again. You know, I just kind of get this feeling that we are at a time when a lot of things are in transition and we're going to see a lot of elections, a lot of political activity. But the thing that's going on right now that intrigues me the most is the sudden reemergence of Chris Kennedy. This statement that he made the other day about Mayor Rahm Emanuel having a strategic gentrification plan to kick black people out of Chicago. Now that's going to trigger some discussion, right? I don't know. Hal?
Yeah, I think it was an amazing accusation, and without any evidence that anything had been plotted. Of course, the African American population has declined in the city.
Mm-hmm.
There's still intractable levels of violence in the west, on the west and the south sides of the city, but it fits in with like people's conspiracy theories, and to go and accuse the mayor of purposely taking steps to lower the African American population and make the city more white at a time when it defies the evidence too, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because this mayor has done far more than the previous mayor, Richard Daley.
You named him.
I did. Emanuel would never name him, but I will. But he's done more to try and invest money into those communities, especially Pullman, which has seen something of a turnaround there. And he's trying. You can argue about whether it's enough, and you can say that it's a problem that needs greater attention, but to say that the mayor's purposely committing what I would call gentricide, in the city, I don't think it's just, and he's not making any friends by doing it.
It's one of those things that, and Madeleine, you can jump in on this too, but it's one of those things that it's a very easy claim to make, because you can take it all the way back to, the arguments that were being made about Cabrini Green 20, 30 years ago, right? Oh, they want to just tear this down so they can give it to rich white people. And of course, in many ways, that is exactly what happened. So we're not unfamiliar with this. We're seeing the same thing happening along the 606 in the what's largely a Hispanic area, where a lot of people are being priced out.
Right, I mean, there's anecdotal evidence there that makes people think about whether there might be some kernels of things happening, and certainly the census data shows that we have lost black population in the city of Chicago. So I think that gives him the opening to make a claim like that, and it helps him politically in the black community, which is how he's going to make a run for governor.
Yeah. So I mean, if this is just a political trick that he's pulling, does it have currency? Is it possible that, I mean, look, we've talked many times about J.B. Pritzker being just completely inevitable. I mean, there's really no need to have an election. J.B. Pritzker has been appointed essentially as the Democratic candidate.
We'll see. I'm not sure the message got down to the voting level yet. So,
so is it not too late for somebody like Chris Kennedy to revive a candidacy? I mean, could it happen?
I think that you can't completely discount Chris Kennedy just because of the name, and the name does have cachet in the African American community. I think you're right. I think that the plan is to try and get as many of those votes with several candidates in the race and see if that can't carry him. But at the same time, he doesn't have the money, and the advertising to run statewide. And of course, Pritzker's got all the money in the world, it seems. He's a billionaire, even if Rauner claims he isn't quite a billionaire. Yeah. So I would never predict these things, but it seems like his campaign up till now, and you alluded to this, has been just sort of moribund and not getting any traction at all.
I guess I have a hard time understanding how, while this might play very well in minority communities in the city of Chicago and in some parts of Cook County, it just doesn't seem to me like it has much currency when you get downstate into small villages and towns in the farm area.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Hal pointed out, he's not really running a statewide campaign, and I think his two appeals are this latest bombshell accusation, really, and then the notion that, I mean, he's kind of running as the anti-establishment candidate, that Mike Madigan has a conflict of interest as a property tax appeal lawyer, and that public officials shouldn't be able to do that and serve in public positions. I think that's kind of where he tries to reach out to progressive voters.
So let's stick with politics, because we've already kind of talked about the assessor's race, and my God, the amount of ink that's been spent on Joe Barrios in the last year has been incredible, and you would think that it would be enough to absolutely destroy somebody, a political candidate, but that doesn't seem to be the case with Joe Barrios. He's got a lot of political support from even people like Tony Preckwinkle, and there's just a kind of a sense that he is he's in such a web of interconnected political power that no one is going to be able to unseat him. Is that, and again, we're not trying to predict here, but just
I think it's very tough in a primary race when the turnout isn't necessarily as great as a general election and people aren't as focused, to beat the chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, an ally of Mike Madigan. The mayor hasn't really spoken out against him, a close ally of Tony Preckwinkle's. And those people have troops that they can get out on election day and turn out a vote. So it's very tough to beat him. But he's got an interesting opponent. He's got two opponents, Fritz Kagi, an asset manager, and he's got Andrea Rala, who is a property tax consultant. But Fritz Kagi, who's apparently has some wealth, has put $560,000, loaned his campaign that much money so far, so he can get on the TV and at the same time, you mentioned the ink, the Tribune's Tax Divide series has questioned his whole the way he runs the office and whether it actually punishes poor people. So he's getting a lot of traction among progressives across the state. And as you say, Chris Kennedy is a supporter. I don't know how much that helps necessarily, but it's going to be a really interesting race. I think one of the most interesting races of the year. And I think the other thing to look for is whether, because Tony is seen in all these pictures with Joe Barrios filing election petitions, whether that and the highly controversial pop tax become a couple of albatrosses around her neck. I mean,
Around her neck or around Berrios' neck?
Well, around her neck.
Is
Could
there
be a
guilt
mute.
by association?
Yeah,
It's a mutual albatross.
but I think they're going to. Bob Fioretti, who hasn't raised very much money, and I don't know what kind of campaign he's going to run, but I think there could be a lot of ways for a smart campaign to paint Tony as the non-reformer.
Yeah. When we were talking about Joe Berrios, I think that another sort of seat of power, if you will, or grid of power, is the hundreds and hundreds of tax attorneys who have built this entire industry around appealing property taxes. I mean, it's not just Mike Madigan and Ed Burke that are in this racket. There's hundreds of smaller people all over the place doing it, and it just seems so incredibly unfair to me that if you have the resources to appeal, you probably will win your appeal. But if you don't, you just got to pay these taxes that are just not intelligently assessed. It's just a crazy system.
Well, and the interesting question, I think, is that Tony Preckwinkle has called for an independent assessment of the assessor and how he does his job. Are we going to see that before this primary?
Right,
I think that's a really
But there have
important
been
question.
independent assessments of the assessor's office,
Well,
and
there's
they've said that
certainly
it's
the
pretty
Tribune
screwed
series,
up.
yes.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Folks say that there is no need for any more studies. People that have looked at this system closely, there have been enough studies. They have a model that they could actually put in place that would make this system fairer, and they're not using it. Joe Berrios would say no, that model is imperfect in its own way, but there's a lot of really smart people that don't think so.
There were many fewer problems along these lines when Houlihan was the assessor, right? I mean, these problems, this kind of static assessment where buildings go for 4 or 5 years without any change at all. This is an introduction of the Berrios regime, as far as I understand what I understand from reading the Tribune, but that's what it seems to be.
There's that's accurate. Yeah, there have been the problems have increased. It was never a perfect system. Jim Houlihan started to work to try to fix it, to help develop this model or have other people develop it. But Berrios claimed that he was going to implement it and did not. So yeah, it's exacerbated, and this idea of the appeal attorneys too. That's the other thing that has come up in this race is accepting campaign contributions from those guys. Just in the last 2 months alone, I looked yesterday, Joe Berrios got about $150,000, most of it from those attorneys.
From tax attorneys.
Yeah, that they're appealing stuff before his
But there's no
office.
quid pro quo.
Says the person from the Better Government Association.
Sarcastically.
Yeah, let the transcript note that you said it sarcastically. Yeah. Well, anyway, I guess the thing is we were talking about the politics of this, but I think we all agree that unseating him is going to be very difficult, right?
I think so.
Well, he's the Democratic chairman of Cook
Cook
County,
County,
and he's
yeah.
running in Cook County, and
Right.
so if anybody...
And the president of Cook County Board is all with him, and the mayor
Right.
might be with him.
But I do think it'll be a real race. And
Do you?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be.
Well, Kagi has gotten a couple of pretty prominent endorsements, which
He has.
none of that has ever happened before.
Yeah, he's gotten Chuy Garcia. He's gotten some prominent congressmen.
Yeah.
Some state
Bernie
senators.
Sanders can't be far away then. Bernie Sanders will
David
be
Orr.
jumping in. David
Yeah.
Orr,
Yeah,
right?
no, I think Sanders. Yeah, right. Sanders might be in there. Who knows?
Because he endorses
That would
in
be
every race.
entertaining.
I want to talk, if we can, for a minute about this. At the last minute, when the budget was being passed, our first budget under Governor Rauner, first one in 3 years or something. At the last minute, there was a provision for the Education Scholarship Fund or some such thing, where you can take up to $1 million and put it into this fund and then deduct it from your taxes, which would mean I think it's fair to say that instead of paying your taxes to the state, you'll just simply put the same amount of money into this fund, which will help people go to non-public schools. And it opened, yesterday or the day before? And within like 24 hours, there was $36 million in it. What's going on here? A better government person.
Well, I mean, I think there are huge public policy implications here that really are going to need to be examined, and that's at a time when the state has still huge structural budget problems. That's essentially $36 million that you just took away from the public coffers to help pay bills that are months and months overdue. So there's that question. This was a situation and an arrangement that was worked out between the Republican Governor Rauner and some of the Republican legislative leaders that had the backing of the Archdiocese of Chicago, who the people there and the Cardinal have some sway with the Democratic leadership, and so here we are.
But as so often happens, this didn't go through the legislative process. It just,
Not at all.
It just popped up a few minutes before
This
the
would
vote.
not be a case of extreme transparency
right.
in public.
Yeah, and I know you
discourse.
advocate for transparency
Yes.
in government. And usually when that happens, it's because the people who are very smart about politics know that it wouldn't stand a chance in hell of getting through the legislature, so we'll just do it this way.
Right. Every time there's a budget, there are
At that last minute.
huge secret last-minute
right.
components
As
to
they
it.
always
right?
say, it's that last hour.
And Mayor Emanuel was, if you will, I don't know what is complicit the right word? He let it skate because he wanted that $450 million for
That was the
CPS.
deal, right? Right. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, you want this $450 million for your school, then shut up and go along with this. Yeah. That's the sausage making, I guess. So now there's this thing that, and I'm glad to have you both here because we've discussed this a few times around here. It has to do with TIFs and all this other stuff. But okay, I'm going to ask you a complicated question. Let's say the Chicago Public Schools sets a budget and they say they need, round numbers, $3 billion, okay? So they say our budget is $3 billion and we need $3 billion from the taxpayers. So that is the amount of money that is allocated to the Chicago Public Schools, and the assessors all around the state have to kick in their, not in this case, in Chicago, have to figure, the assessor has to figure out a way to get $3 billion to the Chicago Public Schools. Now, if this 35 million or whatever it'll be, 75 million, is taken out of the pool of money that the state has, it doesn't mean that the Chicago Public Schools are going to get less money, right? Because they always get what they ask for by law. What it means is that all three of us have to kick more money into the pool so that we can pay the 35 million to those rich people who want to send their kids to private schools and fund the public schools. Am I correct in that?
Well, it doesn't so much have to do with the assessments. The assessments are related to the property tax portion.
I'm sorry, it's not the assessment,
of
right.
the schools,
It's the-
but it does diminish the amount of money available to the state, as Madeleine said, and so I suppose they have to make up for that somehow, and you would understand that far better than I.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Actually, that's an interesting thing that is going to have to happen in this coming year and in this spring, because part of what happened last year was a new method for funding schools, which hasn't happened for 20, 30 years in this state. But they didn't actually, kind of put new money into the system, and it's the new money that gets allocated that will go through this new system and work its way through. And so will there be less of that new money to put into the new school funding system statewide because of this program? I think you could argue that would be the case.
So the state budget allocates, I forget how much it was, but Hal, you said it was like 450 million or something of new money, right?
In new money.
Yeah, in new money to Chicago Public Schools. Are you saying that they may not get that 450 million, even though it was legislated for them?
No, I mean, if that is what is approved and budgeted, they will get it, and you're exactly right. We'll end up paying more at some point along the way.
Somehow or other, we're going to pay to,
Well,
because
if you say that
the state
450 million is what CPS is going to get, and
Right,
then
right.
38 or 40 million has already been taken away because people are choosing to invest in this private school fund instead and get the tax write-off,
Right.
then that is less tax money that goes to fund the rest of government.
So somebody actually, I'm sorry, I'm just beating this, but
But this is not a new. This program exists in other states, and
Right,
it,
right.
it's been done before.
Yeah,
It's not a new
but
thing.
somebody does lose. I mean, other than all the taxpayers having to pay more money, right? So in order to fund that $40 million that goes to the private schools, something had to be cut in order for that to happen.
Well, I'm not sure that something's been cut. Are there winners and losers? Absolutely.
But there's $40 million that's not coming into the state treasury.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, this is an argument that I've been having for years with the TIF folks, because we had Alex Holt, who was the budget director, on the show, and she explained in great painstaking detail that if the mayor takes $50 million from a TIF project to build a CTA station or something, it isn't money that it's not the public schools or the park district do not get $50 million less. It's just that everybody has to pony up to make the difference. The amount of money that we actually pay in our property taxes actually goes up by a little increment because we have to fill that gap. So that's the part of the thing. I know this just sounds like I'm just off on some weird toot here, but because that happens, it makes it easier for legislators to say, give them the 30 million, because we're not really going to pay it.
Well, there is some truth to what Alex was telling you, in that if the schools want more money, let's say, or the city, they have to increase the levy.
The tax levy,
Okay,
right.
the overall amount that they collect
Right.
every year. And so the TIF money is a separate amount of money that they're capturing the increment from whatever the tax rate is. It gets pretty complicated.
Are you still
So-
with us? By the way,
so-
we're talking.
Yeah.
As Ben Jarofsky says,
Yeah.
oh no, we just started talking about tips. I
Yeah,
can hear
yeah,
all the
right.
everybody dialing away.
And not that he likes to talk about TIFs. or anything,
No. He hates talking about tips. Yeah.
But the thing is, could they increase the tax levy if they had that extra assessed value without punishing the other taxpayers? They probably could, and they don't because of that. So it's really hard to explain. But if that money wasn't going into the TIFs, there might be some more money available, but it wouldn't necessarily all be available. The interesting thing is it's sort of a backdoor tax increase.
I guess that's my point, is that it's a backdoor tax increase that didn't have to actually be legislated.
Right.
So, all right,
What I find really fascinating is these TIFs are starting to expire
Yeah.
after 23
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
They're capturing the increment, which means the original theory many years ago was that, when the TIFs expire, those commercial properties or whatever properties were built through the TIFs would then alleviate the tax burden on everyone else. And now they're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep collecting that money, and all the other taxing bodies are going to get it. So it took 23 years, but they increased your taxes without telling you.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's the problem of those commercial buildings not really being revalued and assessed properly.
Which takes
every
us
year.
back to Joe Barrio.
Exactly.
Right. So
Right.
yeah.
It's a very
all a racket,
complex
as they
system.
say. Yeah. So, what does this mean for Bruce Rauner? Bruce Rauner is our governor. He thinks he's going to get reelected.
Well, he's not in charge.
Oh,
He's a famous
I forgot. I
personality.
forgot. That's right. He's not in charge, so maybe it's different. I heard something very interesting this morning that there's a possibility that Trump might take an interest in Jeannie Ives. Apparently, we were joking about Bernie Sanders, but if Trump decides to put his name on something, then Sheldon Adelstein and all these other guys start opening their wallets, and Jeannie Ives might suddenly find herself with millions and millions of dollars. And that would that make it easier for her to challenge Rauner in the primary?
Well, money makes a lot of things
Money
easier,
makes
doesn't
the
it?
world go round.
I think that would certainly help.
Uh-huh.
But I think that's a fascinating race too, and one that money might not be as important in, because it's really an ideological thing, and there are a lot of people around the state who are not happy with the governor and his performance, and angry about his signing HB 40, the abortion bill, which is what I think really tipped the scales and prompted Jeannie Ives to run. And so I suspect those people were never going to vote for Bruce Rauner again anyway if they had an opportunity to vote for someone else, and they do. So.
And it's interesting because I would bet you that something that Bruce Rauner hadn't figured on was that he'd be run at from the right. I mean, it's really kind of interesting to hear somebody who really sounds like an actual Republican going after him on Republican issues of, fiscal conservatism and abortion issues and all that kind of stuff. So apart from whether J.B. Pritzker or Kennedy can beat him in the general election, is it possible he won't even survive the primary?
Well, we've had a number of these kinds of Republican primaries for governor over the years, and the person coming in from the right has never really gotten more than about 30% of the vote, and hasn't ever been enough to put them over the top. But I think it's been a while since we've had one of those, and there's a very different dynamic happening right now. While Hillary Clinton carried Illinois in the last presidential election, outside of Cook County and the collar counties, Trump did very well. And
Sure did.
those are people who, whether Trump gets involved or not, might very naturally vote for Jeannie Ives.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and Rauner is no Jim Edgar, right?
That's
I
right.
mean, who had a high level of popularity.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's that whole thing. If you look at that electoral map, county by county in Illinois, and Illinois looked more like Alabama than anything else.
You're right, exactly.
And it was Alabama with Chicago appended to the top of it, or Cook County. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that, I don't know. I mean, like I said, we're not in the prediction game here today, but it would seem that he's going to have a tough climb to get reelected. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I think he's got to make a very strong case and use all of his resources available to him. And I would expect to see that he will continue to try to triumph by bashing the House Speaker, Michael Madigan.
Yeah.
And
How far can you take that, though? I mean, it's and when you've already declared that you're really actually not in charge of the state in your third year in office, you're pretty much admitting that things aren't going as well as you'd like them to, I guess. So anyway, that's where we're at. We're watching Rauner being attacked from the right, and we're watching J.B. Pritzker, the anointed Democrat candidate, suddenly with a new energetic Kennedy coming after him. And we haven't mentioned Daniel Biss, but
and a few others.
and a few others.
Yeah.
Progressives really like to get agitated when a conservative congressperson or office holder does that little two-step thing where you announce on the day of filing that you're not going to run so that you can anoint your chief of staff or your wife or something to the job. But when progressives themselves do it, I guess it's okay. So when Luis Gutierrez says, hey, Chuy Garcia, you're my guy, I'm going to give you my House seat, I guess maybe it's a different dynamic, I don't know. But what's going on over there? Chuy Garcia looks like he probably has that seat already sewn up, right?
I think that it's his to lose, certainly. I know they've done some internal polling. He's doing very well in the internal polling, although there's 6 other candidates in the race, because it's not very often that a congressional seat
opens up.
Opens up. But it was a weird chain of events.
It sure
because,
was.
You know, no one really expected Gutierrez not to run again. And there's all kinds of speculation. You know, he says that it's just time for him to move on, and he's even toying with the idea of a sort of a symbolic presidential run to further the immigration issues that he's pushed so hard for all those years. But the fact that he, you know, turns around and quickly endorses Chuy Garcia, who perhaps was the biggest possible threat to Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who Gutierrez, the progressive, endorsed in the last mayoral election. Has spawned all sorts of conspiracy theories consistently denied by the powers that be. So, but because it takes Chuy Garcia out of the mayoral race, because either he wins and he becomes a content congressman, or he loses and he's politically finished. You know.
So was it a 3-way phone conversation with Emanuel? Was Emanuel in on that phone conversation?
They insist not. Yes, they insist not.
I mean, I can just kind of hear it now. It's like, you know, look, Chuy, come on. You're never going to be mayor. Let's face it. So why don't we just park you out here, and this is a good congressional seat for you, or something like that.
But you know, Ken, you made a great point, and there's a long history of this sort of thing happening in Illinois.
Oh, sure.
And we also have a situation now where so many incumbent lawmakers in Springfield were so fed up with this budget impasse that went on for years that a lot of them resigned, and many of them resigned, you know, purposely timed it before the election so that the powers that be in various geographic parts of Illinois could step in and anoint someone to be the incumbent, and that's exactly what we have here. And it is, you know, not giving the people their say. And but it continues to happen over and over again across the board, from the progressive side of the aisle to the conservative side of the aisle.
It's interesting that Chuy kind of backed off on his endorsement of Munoz, Rick Munoz, for a seat, and then instead endorsed a young aide, and he's out as we're taping this show, running as a slate with some very young Latino candidates who are fresh faces, I think, trying to ameliorate this idea that he's just another old anointed pole.
You know, just quickly on this whole thing about the state, David Resnick and I, the producer, we were talking a little bit this morning about, you know, it's a kind of a razor-thin edge that the Democrats have in Illinois now. It's getting a little bit thinner, and I noticed the same thing is happening in California. They think they lost their supermajority yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, or the day before. So with a concentrated effort on behalf of Rauner and the Republicans, maybe even the Republican National Committee, is it possible that that the Democrats could really lose their, if not majority, but really lose their ability to just sort of rock solid hold on to all the legislation in Illinois in 2018? Is that in danger for them?
Well, I mean, I think you can't count anything out, and anything is possible. And I think that Rauner has gained some traction with the Mike Madigan argument, and that may continue to hold some sway. And I'm sure that Rauner will have multi-millions of dollars of advertising talking about Mike Madigan and the Democratic tax increase that occurred as a result of this budget and the override, and we'll hear lots more about that. So there's no telling what the impact will be until it actually comes to be election day.
Well, let me let you know, for those of you who are listening on the audio podcast, that our guests today are Hal Dardick. He's with the Chicago Tribune. He is a City Hall reporter over there at the Tribune. And we also have Madeleine Doubek with us. She is the Director of Policy and Civic Engagement at the BGA and the former editor at the Daily Herald. And we're talking about just sort of things in general. We're getting a kind of a status check on 2018 right here on Chicago Newsroom. The other big story, of course, is the whole story about violence in Chicago. It's the thing we can't stop talking about. Homicides were down by 100 this year to 600, just a mere 664 people were killed in Chicago. There's this whole question about whether it's a good idea or good policy for the mayor and the police chief to be, sort of having these congratulatory press releases every time the number goes down a little bit. But you guys wrote a really chilling piece a week or so ago about how many more high-power rifles and semi-automatics are being used in these killings. And the Sun-Times a couple days ago, maybe it was yesterday, did this thing about how more and more people who are coming into the morgue have 3, 4, 10, 30 bullets in them. So that really frightens me, that we're getting to a point where not just the number of people who are being killed, but the volume of the violence is increasing. I don't know. I don't have a question, but it's just
it's
I'm finding
disturbing.
it just really,
And if we didn't have so much higher quality medical care, advances in medicine than we had 20 or 30 years ago, the murder rate would probably be at record levels. But they're using these weapons that are either high powered or have the capacity to fire far more bullets. So
you have nothing to say.
I mean, it's
it's awful.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw that in there because when I look at where we're at today and just kind of do this kind of status check thing, that is the thing that just runs at a kind of a constant level under all these conversations, and it just never seems to go away. And we don't have a clue how to fix this. Nobody does.
Well, the mayor says he's making progress in Inglewood, and I forget the other neighborhood. There's 2 neighborhoods where they have these new predictive abilities. They can tell when shots are fired and where they're fired, and they're using analytics, and they've reduced crime significantly, violent crime in those neighborhoods. But yet, as you say, it's still a really high number of homicides. It's still more than New York and LA put together, and it's a real problem. And I think as the mayor gears up to run for a 3rd term, something, he's going to have to. The idea that you go out and boast that we're back to where we were 2 years ago, that doesn't quite cut it.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring that up, and
one of the things to watch this year is what happens with this court monitoring of the police department that is supposed to occur, and that was pushed by Lisa Madigan, who we have not talked about.
Right.
Our Illinois Attorney General, who surprised everyone also and announced that she was not going to seek re-election, threw that whole thing for a loop. And it's been, I think, about 18 years since that office was vacant and competitive.
Has she been there that long? I guess she has, hasn't she? Wow.
She's been around a while.
Wow, yeah, yeah.
And so
Well, you wrote
that's
a
a
really interesting
situation
piece
where
about
we
that.
don't have, she didn't come out and say, I'm not running and here's my successor.
Right, right.
So we have a very open and competitive primary led by our former governor, Pat Quinn, but also State Senator Kwame Raoul is in the mix, and couple former federal prosecutors. Sharon Fairley,
Sharon Fairley's
who
in,
ran
yeah.
the police civilian investigative agency, I guess would be a generic
for
way
a
to
couple of
describe
weeks,
it.
the new one for 2 weeks or so, right? And Jesse Ruiz is in there?
Jesse Ruiz, you have Nancy Rodering from Highland Park, Scott Drury from the north suburbs, who's a state representative, also a former federal prosecutor. So lots of people in the mix here, and one of the things that I think that we all need to pay attention to is who is really tuned into protecting the Freedom of Information Act. And there's an office within the Attorney General's office called the Public Access Counselor, who is somewhat empowered and probably could be much more empowered to kind of intervene in cases where citizens, some of whom are journalists, are just trying to get information out of our government bodies and are being stymied along the way.
I think this is one of the critical issues that we're facing with, and obviously both of your organizations are very much affected by FOIA laws. So many of the things that both of you have done. You did the Navy Pier thing, and the Tribune has done a number of things.
Yeah, we both pursued the mayor's personal emails when
That's
they
right,
pertained to
that's
public
right,
business.
right.
Yes.
And all of these things came about because we still have a FOIA law in Illinois, and it works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't, but then you need the Attorney General to get in there and kick around for you.
Yeah, I know, interestingly, when you talk about the public access counselor, City Hall is notoriously slow, you know, behind the deadlines to fill their FOIAs. And I've sort of made it a personal policy that to warn people that, you know, I'll give you your 10 days that you get with the extension, and I'm going right to the public access counselor to say you're non-responsive, and boom, I get that stuff within 10 days. You know? So just invoking it is
So then Lisa Madigan's office has been doing a good job. I mean, that's been my perception, that they've been pretty good about being able to scare people into reacting to your FOIA.
I think they take it seriously, although, you know, she can make a determination and you still may have to go to court. It's not binding.
Yeah, yeah.
The law could definitely be made more powerful and give that office some more teeth. In some cases, they're simply stepping in and issuing an opinion, which doesn't necessarily have the power of law.
And this is an independent office. It's a public office, elected public office. So
the Attorney General is the public access counselor within that office is not.
So I mean, I'm guessing in theory, the naive host said, this is less influenced by politics than it might be if it was like in the governor's office or something like that. So are you concerned about this office changing hands? I mean,
I think we all need to be concerned about it, and I think we need to find out where all these candidates are on this, and are they even focused on it? Because so far, I've heard a lot about how the Attorney General is going to take on President Trump and fight some of his comments and things that he said about Chicago violence and immigration and so on and so forth, which, you know, are certainly also important issues. But there's a very basic function in that office that is critically important to all of us, knowing what our office holders are doing behind the scenes, and that is this public access counselor office. and what the candidates' views on the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act and these critical tools that all of us use, citizens, some of whom are journalists, to really understand what our officials are doing.
So, what does that mean? I mean, we can't really say, we can't sit here and list the 8 candidates or whatever it is and say, well, this one scores a 7, this one scores a 6. I have a feeling this is almost sort of like, like getting the bedsheet ballot and voting for judges. It's like, who really knows whether any of these candidates are going to really uphold FOIA and open meetings?
Well, we have to start asking them some questions, first of all, and I think there are just starting. There have been some forums. There will be some more. They're probably not going to get the same attention as the governor's race, and so it's everyone's obligation and duty to ask those questions and seek out some answers and see what we can find.
I think Marianne Ahern is going to be moderating the next one. We need to get to her and say, Marianne, you got to. Well, she ought to know. She's in the same business.
Yes, so. I think that's an immensely important issue. I also think where they stand on the consent decree and how strongly they're going to try to enforce it. Because we go back to the issue of intractable crime in the city of Chicago. A lot of that has to do with trust in the community. They can't solve crimes because nobody in the community trusts them. And a consent decree could go a long way to rebuilding that trust, to making sure that there's strong oversight to reform in the police department, so that over time, those sort of wounds, those deep wounds of police misconduct, can be healed. And also, everyone likes to talk about how much it would cost to enforce the consent decree. Because nobody really wants someone looking over their shoulder all the time. Right. But if you start, just look in the last 60 days, the number of multi-million-dollar settlements
this city's
had because of police misconduct. Yeah. And if you can stop 1 or 2 of those a year, you've paid for the consent decree multiple times over.
Yeah. We're kind of running toward the end of our time here. I just want to jump around with a few things that I've written down here. Apropos of almost nothing at all, but Mayor Emanuel's infrastructure trust was in the news a little bit the other day because it has raised $0. And I think you guys were the ones who reported on the fact that they've spent $5 million.
I think it's Sun-Times.
I'm sorry.
Sun-Times did that. I'll give credit.
Yeah, that's right. No,
we have written, though, about how it really hasn't done what he had hoped it would do. It's raised no independent funds. It hasn't really financed anything.
Now, the reason
maybe it needs to be turned into a tax deduction like the private school.
Yeah, there you go. $37 million in a day. That's right. I heard somebody talking about that last night about California. They're talking about actually doing that in California, that they'll create a separate entity that could accept money and donate it to the state of California, and you can make it a charitable contribution. It gets around the IRS.
There you go.
So wow. But this is what we've come to. But I mean, I raised this question because it's just a favorite topic of mine. We just hear over and over and over again about public-private partnership. And I am convinced that there's no such thing. I just don't think it works. Public-private partnership ends up in the parking meter fiasco and something like that.
With the tollway, the Indiana tollway, it seems to have worked pretty well. So there are instances where I think it can work. Yeah. But they're no panacea, and the parking meter is the perfect example, nationwide example of how it can go wrong.
Right. Again, rapid fire. Janice Jackson has ascended to the highest position, CEO, in the Chicago Public Schools, and it raises a couple of interesting questions. She's an insider. She came through the system. And it seems to me that in the last, since the school reform, whatever you want to call it, we've had this dual-headed thing where you have a CEO who handles all of the really tough money stuff, and then we have the kind of softer side where the person is the academic dean or something like that. She's making the transition from that into the CEO, and I'm just curious about what you guys are thinking about this. She seems very impressive, and she seems to have kept her head above most of the roiling political waters around her. There are plenty of people who are not happy with some of the choices that she's made about schools and school closings and all that. What's your assessment?
Yeah, I don't think she was so involved. And I'm not an expert on CPS and the school closings issue. I think what's interesting is the support that she will have because she's an educator.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. Yeah.
And she has children in the public schools.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
So that's novel since the advent of school reform.
She was a
in the
principal
city
too,
of
right?
Chicago.
I think, yes.
So I think she has some things going for her, but I think what's interesting is Claypool getting forced out by that Inspector General's report, and I don't think he's usually brought in tough bureaucratic situations to do the sort of dirty work.
The hard work.
cleanup.
Yeah. So he got the school funding, but I imagine they may have wanted him through another round of school closings, so then they could anoint Jackson, who could be the good guy. So to speak.
So she came in a little earlier than the plan, is what you're saying.
That's sort of my supposition.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
know.
Well, it's going to be very interesting because, I mean, this decision that they made to close the 4 high schools in Englewood a full year before they have a replacement, even though, of course, as we know, those schools are all deteriorating anyway because people have already made the choice to pull their kids out and move them to other places. It's still politically a really tough thing to take a place like Englewood.
And that was an example
That
Kennedy used to
yes,
go full
exactly.
circle.
Right,
here.
and that goes back exactly.
And the
It's part of
closings of the schools and
The
this
Emanuel
investment in communities. Is
strategic,
argument.
the strategic gentrification plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had people on the show talking about, all the development going on at 63rd Street, starting with Whole Foods and everything, and how that's also part of the strategic removal plan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What else? All right, okay. You guys finish it up. Madeleine, what's going on
Well,
at BGA?
I think that, inspectors general, we sort of ended the second half of 2017 with a focus on them, and they will be a continuing focus into the new year. It's going to be interesting to see what the new legislative inspector general in Springfield comes up with and comes out with, and certainly I think the situation with Forrest Claypool and Nicholas Schuler, the IG for CPS, was fascinating glimpse into just how powerful inspectors general can be when they're properly staffed and budgeted and empowered, and so that will be something to watch. And hopefully improve upon in 2018.
Yeah, I think at the city level too, I don't watch the consent decree, and because the mayor said, "Oh, I'm going to enter it." Well, here we are months later. There's no consent decree yet, so we have to watch that. That's a very important thing for the city.
It's also police contract is being negotiated months and months as we sit here.
Well, right, and that's a key element in whether you can really reform the police department. And all the other contracts in the city, Mayor Daley had made all these 10-year contracts to get that fabulous Olympics we had here.
Right.
And
I said on the show the other day, the only lasting element we have from the 2016 Olympics is that 10-year contract with everybody.
Right, and I think to watch towards the end of the year when the city council and mayoral race shape up, and will Mayor Emanuel get an opponent with some wherewithal? And
Is Troy LaRaviere that person?
I think it's too early to assess, but I think it's a tough uphill battle for a guy that has never run a race
Yeah, yeah.
before.
And we didn't talk about Gary McCarthy either. I mean, I just saw the story this morning that they put his website up yesterday. They just tested it and then took it back down again. But Gary McCarthy or GaryForMayor.com is a real thing. So
Yeah, we'll see how real it is.
yeah,
I'm a believer people aren't in it until they're in it.
yeah.
You know.
But I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. But can Rahm Emanuel be run at from the right? Is it the same? Is the same thing? Can Gary McCarthy run at him as a conservative, as a really
In the city of
strong
Chicago, I don't
conservative?
think so. No, I think the city's too far to the left, and if anything, is moving farther.
You do.
To
See, I see it
further
the other
to
way
left.
around. I have a feeling Chicago is way more conservative than we've always it's just been a shorthand thing. I think a good,
I think
strong
it's
Republican could do very well in this town.
I think some people argued at one point that Daley was a strong Republican.
That's true.
but
That's very true.
you know, but I don't think, I really don't. I don't see that. I see the tide turning the other way, and at least in my lifetime. I think it was more conservative at one time.
So it's Rahm for 20 years.
I don't think he wants to do
I
it.
thought we weren't doing predictions.
No, that's
Come
right.
on, Ken.
I'm sorry.
The other thing that's going to be interesting for all the aldermen who are up is these record property tax increases, the garbage fees, the water increases, and whether voters have had it.
Yeah.
Even though you can make, I'll give the mayor this, you can make a strong case that city people were undertaxed, you know, and given too much. You know, the balance was all off.
Yeah. That's where we got to drop it. We have just like crashed right into the 1 hour mark here. So away we go. Hal Dardick, thanks so much. It's always great having you on the show. Glad
Always
to have
a
you
pleasure
back
to be here.
and come back many more times. And also Madeleine Doubek, of course, from the BGA, and hope we can make you one of these Hal Dardick level regulars to come a lot, because it's always interesting talking to you.
My pleasure, Ken.
Thank you. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a production of Can TV. We're very proud of that, and you can watch us anytime by going to this address, and you'll see our backlog of, we're on our halfway point to 15 years this week, because it's like 7.5 years of doing this. David Resnick is our producer, and thanks to everybody else for all the production work here at Can TV. We appreciate it very much. We'll see you next week. We're going to talk about the Chicago Police and the Spot Shotter program and whether it's working. So tune us in next week, too. See ya. Bye.